Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring Mars, Volume 2. One Martian Afternoon by Tom Leahy. I Like Martian Music by Charles E. Fritch. $1,000 a Plate by Jack McKenty. Alien Equivalent by Richard Rein Smith. A Zloor for Your Trouble by Mack, Reynolds. One Martian Afternoon by Tom Leahy. Originally published in If Worlds of Science Fiction, July 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. She was sweet, gentle, kind, a sort of Martian old Mother Hubbard, but when she went to her cupboard, the clod burst in a cloud of red sand, and the little Martian sand dog ducked quickly into his burrow. Mary Lou threw another at the aperture in the ground and then ran over, and with the inside of her foot she scraped sand into it until it was filled to the surface. She started to leave, but stopped. The little fellow might choke to death, she thought. It wasn't his fault she had to live on Mars. Satisfied that the future of something was dependent on a whim, she dug the sand from the hole. His little yellow eyes peered out at her. "Go on and live," she said magnanimously. She got up and brushed the sand from her knees and dress and walked slowly down the red road. The noon sun was relentless. Nowhere was there relief from it. Mary Lou squinted and shaded her eyes with her hand. She looked in the sky for one of those infrequent Martian rain clouds, but the deep blue was only occasionally spotted by fragile white puffs. Like the sun, they had no regard for her either. They were too concerned with moving toward the distant mountains, there to cling momentarily to the peaks and then continue on their endless route. Mary Lou dabbed the moisture from her forehead with the hem of her dress. "I know one thing," she mumbled. "When I grow up, I'll get to Earth and never come back to Mars, no matter what." She broke into a defiant, cadenced step. "And I won't care whether you and Mummy like it or not," she declared aloud, sticking out her chin at an imaginary father before her. Before she realized it, a tiny lime-washed stone house appeared not 100 yards ahead of her. That was the odd thing about the Martian midday. Something small and miles away would suddenly become large and very near as you approached it. The heat waves did it, her father had told her. "Really?" she had replied. And, "You think you know so doggone much," she had thought. "Aunt Twiley!" She broke into a run. By the Joshua trees, through the stone gateway she ran, and with a leap she lit like a young frog on the porch. "Hi, Aunt Twiley," she said breathlessly. An ancient Martian woman sat in a rocking chair in the shade of the porch. She held a bowl of purple river apples in her lap. Her papyrus-like hands moved quickly as she shaved the skin from one. In a matter of seconds it was peeled. She looked up over her bifocals at the panting Mary Lou. "Gracious child, you shouldn't run like that at this time of day," she said. "You Earth children aren't used to our Martian heat. It'll make you sick if you run too much." "I don't care. I hate Mars. Sometimes I wish I could just get good and sick so I'll get to go home." "Mary Lou, you are a little tyrant," Aunt Twiley laughed. "What you doing, Aunt Twiley?" Mary Lou asked, getting up from her frog posture and coming near the old Martian lady's chair. "Oh, peeling apples, dear. I'm going to make a cobbler this afternoon." She dropped the last apple, peeled, into the bowl. "There, done. Would you like a little cool apple juice, Mary Lou?" "Sure, you betcha. Hey, could I watch you make the cobbler, Aunt Twiley? Could I? Mummy can't make it for anything. It tastes like glue. Maybe if I could see how you do it, maybe I could show her. Do you think?" Now, Mary Lou, your mother must be a wonderful cook to have raised such a healthy little girl. I'm sure there's nothing she could learn from me," Aunt Twylee said as she arose. "Let's go inside and have that apple juice." The kitchen was dark and cool, and filled with the odours of the wonderful edibles the old Martian had created on and in the earth-made stove. She opened the earth-made refrigerator that stood in the corner, and withdrew an earth-made bottle filled with Martian apple juice. Mary Lou jumped up on the table and sat cross-legged. "Here, dear." Aunt Twylee handed her a glass of the icy liquid. Thanks," Mary Lou said, and gulped down half the contents. "That tastes dreamy, Aunt Twylee." The little girl watched the old Martian as she lit the oven and gathered the necessary ingredients for the cobbler. As she bent over to get a bowl from the shelf beneath Mary Lou's perch, her hair brushed against the child's knee. Her hair was soft and white as a puppy's, soft and white like the down from a dandelion. She smiled at Mary Lou. She always smiled. Her pencil-thin mouth was a perpetual arc. Mary Lou drained the glass. "Aunt Twylee, is it true that my daddy says about the Martians?" "True? How can I say, dear? I don't know what he said." "Well, I mean that when us Earth people came, you Martians did infanticide?" Aunt Twylee interrupted, rolling the dough on the board a little flatter, a little faster. "Yeah, that's it. Killed babies," Mary Lou said, and took an apple from the bowl. "My daddy says you were real primitive and killed your babies for some silly religious reason. I think that's awful. How could it be religious? God couldn't like to have little babies killed." She took a big bite of the apple. The juice ran from the corners of her mouth. "Your daddy is a very intelligent man, Mary Lou, but is partially wrong. It is true, but not for religious reasons. It was a necessity. You must remember, dear, Mars is very arid, sterile, and able to sustain many living things. It was awful, but it was the only way we knew to control the population." Mary Lou looked down her button nose as she picked a brown spot from the apple. "I'll tell him he's wrong," she said. "He thinks he knows so damn much." "Mary Lou!" Aunt Twylee exclaimed as she looked over her glasses. "A sweet child like you shouldn't use such language." Mary Lou giggled and popped the remaining portion of the apple in her mouth. "Do your parents know where you are, child?" Aunt Twylee asked as she took the bowl from Mary Lou's hands. She began dicing the apples into a dough-lined casserole. "No, they don't," Mary Lou replied. She sprayed the air with little particles of apple as she talked. "Everybody's gone to the hills to look for the boys." "The boys?" Aunt Twylee stopped her work and looked at the little girl. "Yeah, Jimmy and Eddie and some of the others disappeared from the settlement this morning. The men are afraid they run off to the hills and the renegades got 'em." "Gracious!" Aunt Twylee said, her brow knitted into a crisscross of wrinkles. "Oh, I know those dopes. They're probably down the canals fishing or something." "Just the same, your mother will be frantic, dear. You should have told her where you were going." "I don't care," Mary Lou said with unadulterated honesty. "She'll be all right when I get home." Aunt Twylee shook her head and clucked her tongue. "Can I have another glass, please?" The old lady poured the glass full again, and then she sprinkled sugar down among the apple cubes in the casserole and covered them with a blanket of dough. She cut an uneven circle of half-moons in it and put it in the oven. "There, all ready to bake, Mary Lou," she sighed. "It looks real yummy, Aunt Twylee." "Well, I certainly hope it turns out good, dear," she said, wiping her forehead with her apron. She looked out the open back door. The landscape was beginning to grey as heavier clouds moved down from the mountains and pressed the afternoon heat closer, more oppressively to the ground. "My, it's getting hot. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if we didn't get a little rain this afternoon, Mary Lou." She turned back to the little girl. "Tell me some more about your daddy, dear. We Martians certainly owe a lot to men like your father." "Yeah, that's what he says too. He says you Martians should have died out in a few years if we hadn't come here. We're so much more civilized? Yeah. He says we were so much more civilized than you that we saved your lives when we came here with all our modern stuff." "Well, that's true enough, dear. Just look at that wonderful earth stove," Aunt Twylee said and laughed. "We wouldn't be able to bake an apple cobbler like that without it, would we?" A rumble of thunder shouldered through the crowded hot air. "Now, he says you Martians are kind of likable, but you can't be trusted. He's nuts. I like you Martians." "Thank you, child, but everyone's entitled to his own opinion. Don't judge your daddy too severely," Aunt Twylee said as she scraped spilled sugar from the table and put little bits of it on her tongue. "He says that you'd bite the hand that feeds you. He says we brought all these keen things to Mars, and that if you got the chance you'd kill all of us." "Gracious," said Aunt Twylee as she speared scraps of dough with the point of a long paring knife. "He's a dope," Marilou said. Aunt Twylee opened the oven and peeked in at the cobbler. The aroma of the simmering apples rushed out and filled the room. "Could I have some cobbler when it's done?" Marilou asked, her mouth filling with saliva. "I'm afraid not, child. It's getting rather late." The thunder rumbled again, a little closer, a little louder. The old lady washed the blade of the knife in the sink. "Tell me more of what your father says, dear," she said as she adjusted the bifocals on her thin nose and ran her thumb along the length of the knife's blade. Nothing much more. He just said you'd kill us if you had the chance. That's the way the inferior races always act, he says. They want to kill the people that help them because they resent them." "Very interesting. Well, it isn't so, is it, Aunt Twylee?" The room was filled with blinding blue-white light, and the walls quaked at the sound of a monstrous thunderclap. The old Martian glanced nervously at the clock on the wall. "My, it is getting late," she said as she fondled the knife in her hands. "You Martians wouldn't do anything like that, would you?" "You want the truth, don't you, dear?" Aunt Twylee asked, smiling, as she walked to the table where Marilou sat. "Of course I do, Aunt Twylee," she said. Her scream was answered and smothered by the horrendous roar of the thunder and the piercing hiss of the rain that fell in sheets. In great volumes of water it fell, as though the heavens were attempting to wash the sins of man from the universe and into non-existent in the void beyond the void. Marilou lay beside the other children. Aunt Twylee smiled at them, closed the bedroom door, and returned to the kitchen. The storm had moved on. The thunder was the faint grumbling of a pacified old man. What water fell was a monotonous trickle from the eaves of the lime-washed stone house. Aunt Twylee washed the blood from the knife and wiped it dry on her apron. She opened the oven and took out the browned cobbler. Sweet apple juice bubbled to the surface through the half-moons and burst in delights of sugary aroma. The sun broke through the thinning edge of the thunderhead. Aunt Twylee brushed a lock of her feathery white hair from her moist cheek. "Gracious," she said, "I must tidy up a bit before the others come." The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. I Like Martian Music by Charles E. Fritch. Originally published in Fantastic Universe, September 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Longtree sat before his hole in the ground and gazed thoughtfully among the sandy red hills that surrounded him. His skin at that moment was a medium yellow, a shade between pride and happiness at having his brief symphony almost completed, with just a faint tinge of red to denote that uncertain, cautious approach to the last note which had eluded him thus far. He sat there unmoving for a while, and then he picked up his blowstring and fitted the mouthpiece between his thin lips. He blew into it softly, and at the same time gently strummed the 3 strings stretching the length of the instrument. The note was a firm, clear one, which would have made any other musician proud. But Longtree frowned, and at the disappointment his body flushed a dark green, and began taking on a purple cast of anger. Hastily he put down the blowstring, and tried to think of something else. Slowly his normal colour returned. Across the nearest hill came his friend Channel Jumper, striding on the long, thin, ungainly legs that had given him his name. His skin radiated a blissful orange. "Longtree!" Channel Jumper exclaimed enthusiastically, collapsing on the ground nearby and folding his legs around him. "How's the symphony coming?" "Not so good," Longtree admitted sadly, and his skin turned green at the memory. "If I don't get that last note, I may be this colour the rest of my life." "Why don't you play what you've written so far? It's not very long, and it might cheer you up a bit." "You're a good friend, Channel Jumper," Longtree thought, "and when Rensan and I are married after the music festival, we'll have you over to our hole for dinner." As he thought this, he felt his body take on an orange cast, and he felt better. "I can't seem to get that last note," he said, picking up the blowstring again and putting it into position. "The final note must be conclusive, something complete in itself, and yet be able to sum up the entire meaning of the symphony preceding it." Channel Jumper hummed sympathetically. "That's a big job for one note. It might be a sound no one has ever heard before." Longtree shrugged. "It may even sound alien," he admitted, "but it's got to be the right note." "Play, and we'll see," Channel Jumper urged. Longtree played, and as he played, his features relaxed into a gentle smile of happiness, and his body turned orange. Delicately he strummed the 3 strings of the blowstring with his long-nailed fingers. Softly he pursed his frail lips and blew expertly into the mouthpiece. From the instrument came sounds the like of which Channel Jumper had never before heard. The Martian sat and listened in evident rapture, his body radiating a golden glow of ecstasy. He sat and dreamed, and as the music played, his spine tingled with growing excitement. The music swelled, surrounding him, permeating him, picking him up in a great hand and sweeping him into new and strange and beautiful worlds. Worlds of tall metal structures, of vast stretches of greenness, and of water, and of trees, and of small pale creatures that flew giant metal insects. He dreamed of these things which his planet Mars had not known for millions of years. After a while the music stopped, but for a moment neither of them said anything. At last Channel Jumper shied. "It's beautiful," he said. "Yes," Longtree admitted. "But," Channel Jumper seemed puzzled, "but somehow it doesn't seem complete. Almost, but not quite. As though... Longtree sighed. "One more note would do it. One more note, no more, no less, at the end of the crescendo would tie the symphony together and end it. But which one? I've tried them all, and none of them fit." His voice had risen higher in his excitement, and Channel Jumper warned, "Careful, you're beginning to turn purple." "I know," Longtree said mournfully, and the purple tint changed to a more acceptable green. "But I've got to win first prize at the festival tomorrow. Red Sand promised to marry me if I did." "You can't lose," Channel Jumper told him, and then remembered, "if you can get that last note." If, Longtree echoed despairingly, as though his friend had asked the impossible. I wish I had your confidence, Chan. You're orange most of the time, while I'm a spectrum. I haven't your artistic temperament, Channel Jumper told him. Besides, orange is such a homely colour. I feel ashamed to have it all the time. As he said this, he turned green with shame, and Longtree laughed at the paradox. Channel Jumper laughed too, glad that he had diverted his friend's attention from the elusive and perhaps non-existent note. Did you know the space rocket is due pretty soon? He said. Perhaps even in time for the music festival. Space rocket? Oh, I forgot you were busy composing and didn't get to hear about it, Channel Jumper said. Well, Big Wind, who has a telescope in his hole, told me a rocket is coming through space towards us, possibly from the third planet. Oh, Longtree said, not particularly interested. I wonder if they'll look like us, Channel Jumper wondered. If they're intelligent, of course they will, Longtree said, certainly not caring. Their culture will probably be alien, though, and their music. He paused and turned a very deep yellow. Of course, they might even be able to furnish the note I need to complete my symphony. Channel Jumper shook his head. You've got to compose it all yourself, he reminded, or you don't qualify. And if you don't qualify, you can't win. And if you don't win, you can't marry Red Sand. But just one little note, Longtree said. Channel Jumper shrugged helplessly and turned sympathetically green. I don't make the rules, he said. No, well, Longtree went on in sudden determination. I'll find that last note if I have to stay permanently purple. Channel Jumper shuddered jestingly at this, but remained pleasantly orange. And I'll leave you alone so you can get to work, he said, unfolding himself. Goodbye, Longtree said, but Channel Jumper's long legs had already taken him over to the nearest sand dune and out of sight. Alone, Longtree picked up the blowstring once more, placed it against his stomach, and gave out with a clear, beautiful, experimental note which was again not the one he desired. He still had not found it an hour later, when the sound came. The sound was a low, unpleasant rumble, a sound lower than any Longtree had ever heard, and he wondered what it was. Thinking of it, he remembered he had seen a large flash of fire in the sky a moment before the roar came. But since this last was clearly not likely at all, he dismissed the whole thing as imagination, and tried again to coax some new note from the blowstring. A half-hour later, Channel Jumper came bounding excitedly over a sand dune. "They're here!" he cried, screeching to a halt and emitting yellow flashes of colour. "Who's here?" Longtree demanded, turning violet in annoyance at the interruption. "The visitors from space," Channel Jumper explained. "They landed near my hole. They're little creatures, only half as big as we are, but thicker and grey-coloured." "Grey-coloured?" Longtree repeated incredulously, trying to picture the improbability. "But only on the outside," Channel Jumper went on. "They have an outside shell that comes off, and inside they're sort of pink-orange." "Aha," Longtree said, as though he'd suspected it all the time. "Evidently they wear grey suits of some kind, probably for protection." "They took them off anyway," Channel Jumper said, eager to impart his knowledge. "And they were sort of pink-orange underneath. There are only 2 of them, and one has long hair." "Strange," Longtree mused, thinking of their own hairless bodies. "Wonder what they want." Channel Jumper shrugged to indicate he didn't know. "The short-haired one followed me," he said. Longtree felt the chill blue of fear creep along his spine, but immediate anger at himself changed it conveniently to purple, and it was certain Channel Jumper hadn't noticed. When he had controlled himself, he said, "Well, it doesn't matter. I've got to get on with our symphony. That last note." "He's here," Channel Jumper announced. "What?" Channel Jumper pointed eagerly, and Longtree's eyes followed the direction to where the alien stood at the top of a nearby dune, staring at them. Longtree could feel his skin automatically turning red with caution, blending with the sand, while the ever-trusting Channel Jumper remained bright orange. "Good gosh!" the alien exclaimed. "Not only do they look like modified grasshoppers, they change colour too." "What did he say?" Longtree demanded. "How should I know?" Channel Jumper said. "It's in another language." "And its voice," Longtree exclaimed, almost disbelieving it. "Low. Lower than even our drums rumble." "And they talk in squeaks yet," the alien told himself aloud. Longtree regarded the alien carefully. As Channel Jumper had said, the creature was short and had close-cropped hair on its head. The legs were brief and pudgy, and Longtree felt a shade of pity for the creature who could obviously not get around as well as they. It was undoubtedly intelligent. The space rocket testified to that. And the fact that the creature's skin color stayed a peaceful pink-orange helped assure Longtree the alien's mission was friendly. The alien raised a short arm and stepped slowly forward. "I come in peace," he said in the language they could not understand. "My wife and I are probably the only humans left alive. When we left Earth, most of the population had been wiped out by atomics. I think we were the only ones to get away." Longtree felt his redness subside to orange, and he wondered idly what the alien had said. Except for a natural curiosity, he didn't really care, for he remembered suddenly the symphony had to finish by tomorrow if he were to marry Red Sand. But there was the element of politeness to consider, so he nudged Channel Jumper. "Don't just stand there. Say something." Channel Jumper flustered and turned several colours in rapid succession. He stammered, welcome to our planet, O visitor from space," and motioned the alien to sit down. "That's not very creative," Longtree accused. "What's the difference?" Channel Jumper pointed out, "when he doesn't understand us anyway." "You guys don't really look like grasshoppers," the man from Earth apologized, coming forward. "It's just the long legs that fooled me from up there. Boy, am I glad to find somebody intelligent on Mars. From the air we couldn't see any cities or anything, and we were afraid the planet didn't have any life. I wish we could understand each other, though." Longtree smiled pleasantly, and wished the creature would go away so he could search for the last note in his symphony. He picked up his blowstring so the alien wouldn't sit on it. "Play for him," Channel Jumper suggested, seating himself by segments. "Just the last part, to see how he reacts. Music is universal, you know." Longtree was going to do just that thing, for despite Channel Jumper's warning that he must compose every single note by himself, he felt an alien viewpoint might be helpful. He started playing. Channel Jumper sat dreaming, glowing radiantly. But the alien seemed somewhat perturbed by the music, and fidgeted nervously. Could it be, Longtree wondered, that the incredible beauty of his composition might not translate acceptably to alien ears? He dismissed the thought as unlikely. That's a bit high, isn't it?" the creature said, shaking his head. Lost in the sweeping melodies, neither Longtree nor Channel Jumper paid any attention to the meaningless syllables. Longtree played on, oblivious to all else, soaring toward the great screaming crescendo that would culminate with the missing note. Vaguely he became aware that the creature had gotten up, and he turned a small part of his attention to the action. Longtree smiled inwardly, pleased, and turned yellow with pride to think even a man from another planet should so appreciate his symphony that he got up and danced a strange dance and even sang to the music. The alien held onto his ears and leaped erratically, singing, "No, no, stop it, it's too high, my head's bursting." Channel Jumper, too, seemed pleased by this show of appreciation, though neither of them understood the words, and Longtree swept into the final notes of the rising crescendo with a gusto he had not previously displayed. He stopped where he had always stopped, and the final note came. It startled the Martians. Then the realization swept over them in glad tides of colour. The symphony was complete now, with that final alien sound. Longtree could win both the festival prize and Red Sand with it. The last note was a soft popping sound that had come from the creature from another planet. They looked to see him sagging to the ground, his head soft and pulpy. "My symphony's complete!" Longtree exclaimed jubilantly, a brilliant yellow now. But Channel Jumper's yellow happiness was tinged with green. "A pity," he said. "The creature had to give its life in exchange for the note." "I believe it really wanted to," Longtree said, turning solemn. "Did you see how it danced to the music, as though in the throes of ecstasy? And it didn't change colour once. It must have died happy to know it gave itself to a good cause." "You could probably get by with claiming to use the creature as an auxiliary instrument," mused Channel Jumper, practical once more, "and eliminate any claim that he might have assisted you. But what about the festival? This one looks as though he doesn't have another note in him." "There's the other one," Longtree reminded. "The one with long hair. We can save that one until tomorrow." "Of course," Channel Jumper agreed, standing up. "I'll go get it, and you can keep it safe here in your hole until tomorrow night." "You're a good friend, Channel Jumper," Longtree began, but the other was already bounding out of sight over a sand dune. Blissfully he raised the blowstring into position and played the opening notes to his symphony. The alien lay unmoving with its head in a sticky puddle, but Longtree took no notice. He didn't even consider that after the festival he would never be able to play his symphony again in all its glorious completeness. His spinal column tingled pleasantly, and his skin turned the golden yellow of unbearable happiness. The music was beautiful. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. $1,000 a Plate by Jack McKenty. Originally published in Galaxy Science Fiction, October 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Sunset on Mars is a pale, washed-out, watery sort of procedure that is hardly worth looking at. The shadows of the cactus lengthen, the sun goes down without the slightest hint of colour or display, and everything is dark. About once a year there is one cloud that turns pink briefly. But even the travel books devote more space describing the new sign adorning the Canal Casino than they do on the sunset. The night sky is something else again. Each new crop of tourists goes to bed at sunrise the day after arrival with stiff necks from looking up all night. The craters of the moons are visible to the naked eye, and even a cheap pair of opera glasses can pick out the buildings of the Deimos space station. A typical comment from a sightseer is, "Just think, Fred, we were way up there only 12 hours ago." At fairly frequent intervals, the moons eclipse. The local Chamber of Commerce joins with the gambling casinos to use these occasions as excuses for a celebration. The Mardi Gras includes floats, costumes, liquor, women, gambling, and finishes off with a display of fireworks and a stiff note of protest from the nearby Mars Observatory. The day after a particularly noisy, glaring fireworks display, the top brass at the observatory called an emergency meeting. The topic was not a new one, but fresh evidence in the form of several still-wet photographic plates showing out-of-focus skyrocket trails, and a galaxy of first-magnitude aerial cracker explosions was presented. "I maintain they fire them in our direction on purpose," one scientist declared. This was considered to be correct because the other directions around town were oil refineries and the homes of the casino owners. "Why don't we just move the observatory way out in the desert?" a technician demanded. "It wouldn't be much of a job." "It would be a tremendous job," said Dr. Morton, the physicist. "If not for the glare of city lights on Earth, we wouldn't have had to move our telescopes to the moon. If not for the gravel falling out of the sky on the moon, making it necessary to resurface the reflectors every week, we wouldn't have had to move to Mars. Viewing conditions here are just about perfect, except for the immense cost of transporting the equipment, building materials, workmen, and paying us triple time for working so far from home. Why, did you ever figure the cost of a single photographic plate? What with salaries, freight to and from Earth, maintenance and all the rest, it's enormous." "Then why don't we cut down the cost of ruined exposures," asked the technician, "by moving the observatory away from town?" "Because," Dr. Morton explained, "we'd have to bring in crews to tear the place down, other crews to move it, still more crews to rebuild it, not to mention unavoidable breakage and replacement, which involved more freight from Earth. At $7.97 per pound deadweight, well, you figure it out." "So we can't move, and we can't afford ruined $1,000 plates," said the scientist who had considered himself a target for the fireworks. "Then what's the answer?" The usual suggestion was proposed that a delegation approach the town council to follow up the letter of protest. A search through the past meeting's minutes showed that this had never accomplished anything up to date. A recent arrival to the observatory mentioned that their combined brainpower should be enough to beat the games, and thus force the casino owners, who were the real offenders, out of business. One of the scientists, who had already tried that very scheme on a small scale, reported his results. He proved with his tabulations that in this instance science, in the guise of the law of averages, was unfortunately against them. Dr. Morton rose to his feet. The other men listened to his plan, at first with shocked horror, then with deep interest, and finally in wild exultation. The meeting broke up, with most of the members grinning from ear to ear. "It's lucky Dr. Morton is a physicist," said one of the directors. "No astronomer would ever have thought of that." A few days later, a modest little ad appeared in the weekly publication, What to Do in Marsport. It did not try to compete with any of the casino ads, all of which featured pretty girls, but it had a unique heading. "Free, for the first time ever, your horoscope, scientifically cast by the staff of the famous Mars Observatory. Learn your luck, your future. Write or call Mars Observatory. No charge, no obligation." Since the horoscopes being offered were about the only things on Mars that didn't cost the tourists any money, the response was great. The recipient of a horoscope found a mimeographed folder which contained 3 pages describing the present positions of the planets, where to look for Earth in the sky, and what science hoped to learn the next time Mercury was in transit. The 4th page held the kicker. It said that while the tourist's luck would be better than average at most of the gambling houses, he would lose consistently if he played at Harvey's club. Within 2 days, the only people playing at Harvey's were the shills. The following day, the visitors to the observatory included Harvey. The gambler was welcomed with mingled respect for his money and contempt for his occupation. He was taken immediately to see Dr. Morton, who greeted him with a sly smile. Harvey's conversation was brief and to the point. "How much?" he asked, waving a horoscope under Dr. Morton's nose. "Just a promise," said the scientist. Harvey said nothing, but looked sullen. "You are on the town council," Morton continued. "Now, the next time the question of tourist entertainment is discussed, we want you to vote against a fireworks display." He then explained how important plates had been ruined by skyrocket trails. Harvey listened with great interest, especially when Dr. Morton flatly stated that each casino, in turn, would get the same publicity in the horoscopes. "The council members are all for the tourists," Harvey commented. "And you guys are supposed to be nuts, like all scientists. But I'll do like you say." He reached into his pocket. "Here's $50. Use it for a full-page ad this time, and do the Desert Sands Casino in your next horoscope. And say, before I go, can I look through the telescope? I never seem to have had the time before." At weekly intervals, Dr. Morton did the Desert Sands, Franklin's Paradise, the Martian Gardens, and the Two Moons Club. From each owner he extracted the same promise to vote against the fireworks at the council meetings. The technique was settling down to a routine. Each victim came, made the promise, paid for the following week's ad, named the next casino, and was taken on a tour of the observatory. Then disaster struck. It took the form of an interplanetary telegram from Harvard Observatory, their parent organization. It read, "Earth newspapers carrying accounts of horoscopes published by your organization, very unscientific, must stop at once. Find other solution. L.K. Bell, Director." Dr. Morton was eating alone in the staff dining room when he noticed a familiar face beside him. "Harvey," he said, "guess you've come down to gloat over our misfortune." "No, Professor," said Harvey. "You've got my promise to help you boys, and I'll stick by you. It's a rotten shame, too. You just about made it. The rest of the club owners saw the writing on the wall and were going to cooperate with you when the telegram came. All of us got contacts in the telegraph office, so they heard about it as soon as it arrived and stayed away." Dr. Morton said, "Yes, I suppose they would. There's not much we can do now." "There are 13 members on the council," Harvey continued, "and you've got 5 of us. If that telegram had only come 1 day later, no more fireworks. But I got an idea." Dr. Morton pushed aside his empty coffee cup and stood up. "Let's get out in the fresh air." The town council was adding insult to injury by staging one of the biggest fireworks displays ever. It consisted of practically all skyrockets. Dr. Morton expressed wonder at their supply. Harvey explained that they were made right on Mars. He went on to tell his idea. "I was real interested in everything when you took me round the first time I was here," the gambler said. "The same goes for the other boys who saw the place. Most of us meant to come out here and look around sometime, but you people work nights, and us mostly working nights too. We never got around to it. How about arranging an exclusive tour sometime just for the club operators and their help? Then when they see everything, you could offer to name a star after them or something. If I hadn't already promised, I'd be willing to promise, just to be able to point in the sky and say, 'That's Harvey's star.'" Dr. Morton smiled gently. "That's a wonderful idea," he said, "but I don't think it would work. Any stars worth looking at with a naked eye already have names. The only ones we could name after people are so far away that it would take an exposure of several hours just to see them on a photographic plate. You wouldn't be able to point yours out at all. Besides, Harvard Observatory wouldn't stand for this idea either. It would make as much sense to them as you naming a poker chip after me." He sighed. "But in any case, We would like to have all the owners over sometime. It might improve relations somewhat." The two of them watched a rocket wobble all over the sky before exploding. "Let's go back inside," said the physicist. "Maybe we can arrange that tour for Sunday." Sunday afternoon, the visitors, presumably softened up by what one of the chemists thought were martinis, were seated in the lecture hall listening to Dr. Morton's concluding remarks. "One of the technicians is working on a gadget with a photocell that closes the shutter on the film when a rocket goes up," Dr. Morton was saying. "It should cut down the exposure time a great deal. Right now, every night may be significant. If the plates from any one night are spoiled, we may not be able to duplicate them for a Martian year. Mankind is preparing the first trip to another star, and the work of Mars Observatory is necessary to ensure the success of that trip. You gentlemen are rightly the leaders of Mars, and so it is up to you to decide whether or not that success will be possible." He sat down to a smattering of applause. The visitors, except Harvey, then left. "It didn't go over, Professor," said Harvey. "I know," said Dr. Morton. "That washes out the plan." He turned to the gambler. "You're the only person I can trust with this," he said. "How would you like to help me make some fireworks?" 1 week later, the two men had everything ready. That night, as quietly as possible, they moved to a position behind a fence near the skyrocket launching racks. Dr. Morton was carrying a compass, a flashlight, and a small clinometer. Harvey was struggling with 2 large skyrockets. He whispered, "What if we miss, or they go off too soon, or something?" "Nonsense, Harvey," said Dr. Morton. He busied himself with the flashlight and compass, and carefully aimed one of the rockets. "You forget I am a physicist." He then aimed the other rocket and checked elevation with the clinometer. "The fuels are standard, and I worked out the trajectories on the computer. Ready with your match? These are going to explode in the canal and get everybody in the canal casino all wet." He peeked over the fence to see how the regular display was doing. "Here comes their finale. Ready, set, light." Covered by the launching of the last of the official display, the 2 rockets arced up and away. One of them did explode in the canal, and most of the casino's patrons did get wet. But the other wobbled off to the right, landed on the roof of Harvey's bachelor home, and burned it to the ground. Dr. Morton sat numbly in front of his typewriter, staring at a letter. He couldn't seem to find the right words for what he wished to say. He tried to derive inspiration from a glossy photograph lying on the table beside him. It had what looked like another skyrocket trail on it. Before he could answer it, the door opened and Harvey walked in, accompanied by 2 men with muscles. "I haven't seen you since the accident, Professor," he said. "I've been trying to write you a letter," said Dr. Morton, "to tell you how sorry I am about what happened. And I also have to thank you for getting that law against fireworks through the council. I'm extremely sorry it took your house burning down to convince them." "I keep my promises," said Harvey. One of the men with muscles turned the radio on, loud. "We're trying to get up a collection among the staff to help pay for your losses," said Dr. Morton, "but the director suggested a more permanent kind of remembrance." He picked up the photograph. "This will be one of the brightest objects in the sky in a few months. It won't be back again for thousands of years, but it will be around for a good while. We've just discovered it, and it is our privilege to call it Harvey's Comet." "That's nice," said Harvey. The first of the 2 men went around pulling down blinds. The other went into the bathroom and started filling the tub. "Well," said the physicist, looking tired and old, I guess there's nothing more I can say." "Oh, yes, there is, Professor," said Harvey, with a sudden grin on his face. He turned to his muscle men. "You two guys, cut out the comedy and bring it in now." The two men followed his instructions. "You see, Professor," the gambler continued, "I took a beating on the house, but the other club boys chipped in and made up all my losses. So I don't need your money at all. Besides, I have two things to thank you for. First, I heard about the comet from one of your men, and it's the nicest things anybody's ever done for me." One of his men came back with what looked like a round candy box. "Second, that fire was the best publicity stunt I could get. It made the papers back on Earth, and all the new tourists are packing into the Harvey Club. Even the other operators are playing my tables. That's why I want you to have this." He handed Dr. Morton the box. It read Harvey's Club in the centre, and Dr. Morton's poker chip around the edge. Across the bottom it said 5,000. "That's dollars in it, Professor," said Harvey. "Don't spend it all in one place." The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Alien Equivalent by Richard Rein Smith. Originally published in Planet Stories, summer 1955. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Chester Farrell emerged from the narrow alley and paused before the barbed wire fence. Behind him, the Martian city was a maze of strange sounds, angular buildings, acrid odors, and dark shadows. Before him, beyond the fence, 3 spaceships pointed their bows toward a star-studded sky. The slender ships gleamed dully in the starlight as they rested on the red desert. He touched the money in his pocket to reassure himself that at last he had the fare for the trip to Earth. His eyes scanned the heavens, searched for the bright light that was Earth. Earth! In itself, the planet meant little to him. The seas, mountains, valleys, and forests did not cause the burning desire inside him. He closed his eyes and remembered a brick house in Cleveland and the brown-haired woman and chubby boy who lived there. He recalled slender, soft fingers that touched him gently and a small form that waddled uncertainly across the living-room floor. 3 years ago, he had left Louise and Sammy on Earth. He had come to Mars to make a small fortune. The dream had not materialized. The Mars Mining Corporation didn't want to pay their employees good salaries, although the ores transported to Earth sold for tremendous profits. They paid their employees as little as possible. It was simple. Governments wanted colonists on Mars to exploit the planet. Mars Mining wanted colonists to remain and operate their mines. The two groups, political and business, collaborated, and while the trip to Mars cost only $100, the return trip to Earth cost $1,000. Because of the high price of living on Mars and the low salaries, the fee was an encouragement to remain on the planet. It had taken him 3 years to save enough money to rejoin his family. Bitterness filled him as he studied the motionless ships, convertible spaceships. The bulkheads inside the hull were collapsible, and the space in the ship was constantly adjusted into different-sized storage holds and passenger compartments. During the voyage to Earth, he would be the only passenger and would occupy a coffin-like compartment. Every other available foot of space would be filled with valuable ores. When the ship returned to Mars, The passenger compartments would be spacious, luxurious, and comfortable. They would be filled with hundreds of propaganda-fed, eager colonists who were unaware of the economic trap before them. As he turned and followed the fence towards the spaceport's office buildings, he heard the faint sounds behind him. A whisper of movement across the red sand. An animal? He glanced uneasily at the tiny lights from the office buildings. In the thin atmosphere, light carried a long distance and was deceptive. The lights seemed near, but he knew he still had a 15-minute walk ahead of him. Once more he heard the indefinable sound behind him. His imagination? A Martian? An Earthman, the sound of harsh breathing informed him. He leaped to one side as the sounds neared his back. Too late. Something crashed into the side of his head, and bright lights danced gaily inside his skull. He fell and rolled frantically across the soft stand. As he scrambled to his feet, he saw his attacker, a husky, powerfully built man. A blackjack dangled loosely from a hand. Before he could rise, a knee struck him on the jaw. He sank to the ground. The man was on him, pinning him to the sand. Farrell's nostrils were filled with the man's acrid body odour. A knife glittered in the starlight as it was pressed gently against his throat. "Tell me where the money is," the man ordered. "It'll save time." Too stunned to speak, Farrell nodded at his coat pocket. The man removed the money and counted rapidly, somehow managing to keep the knife in his hand while he flipped the bills. Satisfied, he stuffed the bills in a pocket and raised the knife for a fatal lunge. His arms pinned at his side by the man's knees, Farrell knew only one thing could save him: words. "I can get you 5 times that much," he said quickly, the words crowding each other in the haste. It worked. The knife wavered, hesitated. If he had screamed, "Don't kill me!" he would have been killed instantly. But the simple statement had aroused his assailant's curiosity. 5 times that much," the man repeated gruffly. Phobos, the largest and closest of the 2 moons, moved visibly across the dark sky. Suddenly, they were no longer in the shadow of a building. Moonlight flowed across the man's face, and for the first time he saw his features. He looked up at a rough, almost brutal face with thick lips, fierce eyes, blunt, broken nose, and bushy eyebrows. $5,000, Farrell confirmed. "Where?" "Dankor City. You've heard of a Martian game called Rakal?" He frowned. "Yeah, I've heard of it. I've also heard Earthmen don't win very often." "I won," Farrell told him. 5,000. I spent most of it, but I saved the 1,000 to go back to Earth. If you don't kill me, I'll win 5,000 for you." His adversary grinned wryly and lowered the knife towards Farrell's throat. "This sounds like a trick." "Trick? How can I trick you? Dankor is off limits to Earthmen. You and I will be the only." The man cocked his head and asked, "You have any Martian friends in Dankor?" Farrell laughed at the thought. "Martian friends?" Some of the wariness left the other's face. Everyone knew no Earthman had a Martian friend. The Martians were a fading but proud race. They resented Earthmen and submitted bitterly to their presence. Martians did not associate with Earthmen. To do so would mean loss of social standing, and almost always loss of their lives by the hand of some fanatical anti-Earth group. Martians submitted to the invasion of their planet by colonists because they had no choice. They were few in number, a weak, dying race. Inwardly they hated Earthmen, and, given the chance, would rid Mars of all colonists. While his antagonist considered the offer, Farrell's mind whirled rapidly. How could he escape? His body was trapped beneath the man's weight, unable to move. Call for help? He quickly discarded the idea. On one side was a Martian city, and on the other was the spaceport. The group of crude stone buildings were inhabited by aliens. Martians might come and watch him die if he called for help, but they'd never try to save him. The spaceport was deserted except for the empty, waiting spaceships, and the office buildings were too far away for anyone to hear a cry. He could do nothing. "I'll give you a chance," his enemy said as he rose to his feet. "You win 5,000 for me, and I'll let you keep the 1,000 and your life." He placed the knife in a sheath and drew a stubby revolver from a pocket. "If you make a wrong move, I'll blast you in half. I don't like to use these things because it's noisy, but—" He waved the gun, and the action seemed to complete the sentence in itself. "Let's take a taxi," Farrell suggested as he rose shakily and brushed red sand from his clothes. "No." "It'll take an hour to walk there," Farrell protested mildly. "We'll walk," the man stated. "We'll walk, and we'll take the most deserted streets." Farrell led the way through the small Martian city that bordered the spaceport, and across a narrow stretch of desert to Dankor Canal. At the canal, he turned and followed it northward, walking on the huge, weather-smoothed stones that formed one wall of the large waterway. Thousands of feet below them, muddy water gurgled roaringly as it moved southward to the Martian farmlands. In the clear atmosphere, the opposite wall of the canal, 10 miles away, was a thin, dark line. "What's your name?" Farrell asked suddenly. "Tharp." "Where do you work?" "None of your business." They walked in silence, the two moons casting double shadows from each of their bodies. With a sinking sensation in his stomach, Farrell realized the odds were against his seeing his family again. "How did you learn I had the money?" Farrell asked. Tharp grinned broadly. "When anyone makes a reservation on the flight to Earth, the news gets around. It got around to me." His laughter sounded brittle in the thin atmosphere. After what seemed like years, they arrived at the outskirts of Dankor. Although it was off-limits, the police patrolled infrequently, and even those patrols were publicly known schedules. Dankor was a small cluster of low, crumbling buildings. The streets were littered with filth, and pale Martians dressed in rags shuffled aimlessly with blank eyes as if their world had already died. Jars of brilliant fireflies on rooftops illuminated the village. Imprisoned in the transparent containers, the fluttering insects cast an eerie, pulsating glow on the dismal buildings. Farrell paused before a thick wooden door and kicked it with his right foot. "The first time I came here," he explained, "I almost broke my knuckles before they heard me." A few minutes later, the door opened. "Come in," a bony, wizened Martian invited. Tharp remained a few paces behind Farrell as they entered the room. The stench of the place made their stomachs churn sickly. A group of listless Martians sat in the center of the floor and watched a large cube-shaped object. Two Martians on opposite sides of the cube sat before small control panels. The Earthman watched as one Martian touched a button on his control panel. A green ball inside the cube rose a few inches. The other Martian pushed a button and a brown ball at the top of the hollow cube dropped a few inches. A thin Martian with grey hair and watery eyes asked, "You wish gamble?" Farrell nodded his head affirmatively. The Martian smiled weakly and inquired in broken English, "What is wager, money or dushal?" "What in hell is dushal?" Tharp asked. "It's hard to explain," Farrell confessed, "but we'll have to wait until those Marties are through, and you'll see what dushal is when they finish." Farrell squatted on the cold floor. Tharp sat 2 yards to one side. Silently they watched the Martian gamblers. Several minutes later, the emaciated aliens rose from their positions behind the small control boards. "Is the game over?" Tharp asked. "Yes. See the Martian with the green tunic? He's the one who lost the game. The winner will receive a certain measure of dushal from him." They watched intently as a strange machine was brought out into the room. The 2 gamblers sat close to each other. A third Martian attached electrodes to their heads, then flipped a lever on the ancient, rusty machine. The Martian who lost the game grimaced with pain. A needle on the machine's single dial moved all the way to the right, then quickly returned to its original position. An expression of joy spread the victor's thin lips into a wide smile. A few seconds later, the electrodes were removed from their heads. Tharp grunted his bafflement. "Dushal," Farrell explained quickly, "means an expression of sorrow or pain. By means of that machine, the winner was able to receive in his brain the sensation of the loser's physical and mental agony at losing the game." "That's what they were betting?" Tharp asked unbelievingly. "Yes. It's the same principle as humans who play games merely for the disappointed expression on the loser's face. The Martians do it a little differently. They have a machine that transmits the loser's pain into the victor's brain. The Martians are constructed in such a way that the agony of another person implanted in their minds is very pleasant to them. They must be crazy." Farrell shrugged his shoulders. "Maybe. Anyway, you have a choice. You can bet the $1,000 or a certain amount of dushal." "If we bet dushal and lost, we'd only have to pay the Martians a little sensation of agony at losing the game?" "Right." Tharp laughed. "Hell, let's bet dushal. That'll be better than losing $1,000 if we should lose the game." He slipped his hand into a pocket, and the cloth bulged in Farrell's direction. "And we'd better win." "What's the difference?" Farrell thought. "If we win or lose, you'll kill me. You can't leave me alive to report you to the police." "You can play the game," Farrell suggested. "I'll tell you what buttons to push." "Okay. Tell the Martians we want to bet an amount of dushal worth 5,000. How much would that be on the dial on that gimmick?" Farrell pointed at the graduation to the extreme right of the dial. "See that line? That would be worth 5,000 in dushal, the same amount the Martian bet." Tharp smiled as he remembered how easily the Martian gambler had paid that amount of dushal. If they lost the game, he'd have no trouble paying the gambling debt. 5,000, Farrell told the waiting Martian. "We'll bet dushal." The Martian smiled happily, disappeared for a few minutes, and returned with a large bag. Without ceremony, he spilled the contents on the stone floor. Tharp gasped when he saw the golden earrings, cups, anklets, rings and bracelets studded with diamonds. They were easily worth more than $8,000. "Why the hell are they living in dumps like this when they have that kind of stuff? They could buy—" He hesitated, as if the incompleted sentence indicated an infinite list of articles. "It means nothing to them," Farrell explained. "They have a different monetary system. Most Martians are so poor, even the rich ones can't buy anything more valuable than food, clothes, and shelter, and the Martians are too stubborn to trade with Earthmen." He reflected idly that on all of Mars the only place where the two races associated was in gambling rooms like this. Even there, the Martian's attitude was stiff and businesslike. The group of aliens shuffled about uneasily, impatient for the game to begin. "You ready to start?" Farrell asked. "Sure." "The object of the game is to get those balls at the top of the cube to the bottom level. The Martian will try to get the ones at the bottom to the top. The balls are governed by the control panels. It's like three-dimension Chinese checkers." "Sashush rakol," a Martian said loudly. "The game has started. Push the top green button." Tharp thrust with a grimy finger. The game lasted several minutes. Each time it was their turn to move, Farrell told Tharp what button to push. Even while the game progressed, the husky man watched Farrell out of the corners of his eyes. Farrell realized that even with the distraction of the game, he'd have no chance to launch a surprise attack on his enemy. Finally, the Martian gambler rose. His colourless lips spread in a wide grin of anticipation. "We lost!" Tharp exclaimed. Farrell agreed. "We lost. Anyway, all we lost was a little Dushal." The Martians gathered around the two Earthmen, attached electrodes from the alien machine to Tharp's head. 3 minutes later, Tharp still sat with the electrodes attached to his skull. The Martians were impatient. "What's the matter?" Tharp inquired angrily. "The game between the Martians. It only took the loser a few seconds to pay the Dushal." "That's right," Farrell agreed. "But look at the dial." Tharp stared at the motionless instrument. "Dushal is an expression of mental or physical agony," Farrell reminded him. "Concentrate and feel sorry you lost." He assumed a thoughtful expression. The indicator wavered slightly. "Not so good. See, there are 10 graduations on the dial. The needle has to touch the 10th before you pay the amount of Dushal you owe. So far, the needle hasn't passed the first graduation. In other words, you haven't paid a 10th of the Dushal." Tharp drew his revolver. The Martians did not like the sight of a gun in an Earthman's hand. They had no way of knowing that it was meant for Farrell and not themselves. A dozen aliens threw themselves on Tharp and quickly disarmed him. 10 Martians held an outraged Tharp motionless, while an 11th removed alien handcuffs from his tunic and placed pairs around his wrists and ankles. Farrell recovered his money. "Martians aren't thieves," he informed the angry man who struggled in vain at the metal bindings, "and therefore they like to see everyone pay their debts. They'll keep you here until you pay the wager. You see, by being behind the control board and pushing the buttons, you're the one who has to pay the Dushal, although I told you what buttons to push." "A trick!" Tharp screamed. Tharp's face reddened. "You won't get far," he threatened. "I'll pay this Dushal in a few minutes. They'll let me free and I'll—" "You don't realize," Farrell interrupted. "Martians are sickly, sensitive people, and they're adept at projecting sensations of agony from their brains. On the other hand, Earthmen are strong physically and know nothing about projecting physical or mental pain." He paused to watch 3 Martians who removed gleaming sharp knives from their tunics. They pressed the blades against Tharp's arms. The knives cut through his coat, shirt, and flesh. The cloth reddened quickly. "They want their Dushal payment," Farrell informed him. "They'll get it if they have to slice you to ribbons." Tharp's wild eyes stared at the dial before him. The needle touched the 2nd graduation, then settled to the 0 position. "You see," Farrell continued, "it's a matter of equivalent. Earthmen are so strong they have to really suffer physically before they can match a Dushal payment that a Martian can create as easy as snapping his fingers." Once more, the glittering knives bit into Tharp's flesh. He screamed with pain. "Get help! Get help before they kill me!" Farrell went for help. But once beyond the thick door that suddenly suffocated Tharps's shrill screams of pain, he didn't run for help. He walked slowly. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. A Zloor for Your Trouble by Mack Reynolds, originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, January 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. I was sitting on the cot in the little room at the rear of my hand garage where I keep my equipment and most of my trophies, and cleaning my .257 Roberts when the knock came at the door. It was a sharp, decisive knock. Then the door opened, and I saw Wesley Marks for the first time. It didn't excite me. He said, "Mr. Napoleon Prescott." I began to say, "Everybody calls me Nap," but then I didn't. There was something about this guy that didn't click with me. Say what you will against snap judgments, I still take my love at first sight, and enmity often the same way. For one thing, he gave me the impression of looking for trouble. He was about 6'2", and he had what he obviously thought was an aristocratic face. His nose was the type that used to be called Roman, and looked like it'd be a honey to punch. He was dressed like a million, which didn't particularly impress me either. I'm on the rugged side myself, red-headed and homely to boot. He took in the rifle I was cleaning, and his eyebrows went up questioningly. "Collector?" he asked. Somehow or other he managed to put over the impression that he thought I didn't have the intellect to have a hobby. "Not exactly," I told him. "This is a tool, not a collector's item." There was almost a laugh in his voice now. "You mean you use that relic in your work?" I put the gun down, told myself to take it easy, then said, "They've made a lot of developments in weapons since this rifle was popular, but it still has advantages on certain types of jobs. For instance, if I was after a Kodiak bear up in the Alaska National Park," he snorted, "I'd take a bazooka rifle and be sure who came out on top." "Sure you would," I told him. "And there wouldn't be enough bear left to feed your dogs. I usually work for a zoo or a museum. They either want the animal alive or in good mounting condition. I admit that they've got guns now that one man can carry that sink one of the old-time battleships. Okay, but in my line I seldom need one." He didn't like my tone of voice, but he dropped the point and began looking around for a place to sit. I hadn't asked him to sit down, and I didn't now. I said, "Was there something I could do for you?" "I wanted to hire you for a rather lengthy period," he told me. "I'm all booked up for the next 6 months. This is something rather special." It always is when somebody wants you to cancel a job with a regular client. He didn't like me any better than I liked him. That was obvious. He said, "This comes under the heading of work for the government." I told him, "There are other professional hunters, some of them nearly as good as I am." The last was sarcastic. "Possibly better," he said, "but none of them are your size." I could feel my face approaching the colour of my hair at that one. "Keep my size out of it," I snapped. I indicated with a thumb a little statuette on my desk. "The guy my mother named me after was pint-sized too. He got along all right." He looked over at Bonaparte. He said, "Napoleon was a big name once, but is only a bust now." "Listen," I told him, "you're asking for a bust yourself. Why don't you run along? I'm busy." He ignored me, found a chair that had nothing but a few magazines on it, tossed them to the floor, and sat down. "Your name was brought up because you're the smallest professional hunter on Earth. It'd save a few thousand credits in getting you to Mars and back." That stopped me. "What in Kurt are you talking about?" I growled. "The government wants a specimen, at least one, of a Zloor." "A what?" "A Zloor," he repeated. "A small Martian animal." I scowled at him. "And just why does the government want a Zloor?" "That's a secret." "Okay, I'll tell you another secret. Somebody else can catch the government a Zloor. I've never been off Earth, and I haven't any particular hankering to go now." I picked up the .257 Roberts again and reached for my oil can. He got to his feet, something just this side of a sneer on his face, and said, "I doubt if you could have got one anyway." I said easily, "If anyone else could catch it, I could." He reached for the doorknob. "I'd lay 1,000 credits against that," he said. He began to leave. "Wait a minute, buddy," I snapped. "Are you just sounding off, or have you got 1,000 credits you don't care what happens to?" He turned and faced me. "I am willing to wager 1,000 credits that you can't capture a Zloor." "How big are they?" "About the size of a rabbit." I glowered at him. "They very fast, or very poisonous, or what?" He shrugged. "They can't run quite as fast as a common Terran hare, and I understand they're quite gentle." "Then why haven't they been captured?" "Among other things, Napoleon," he rolled my name over his tongue as though he got a big laugh from it, "there have been only a few hundred persons in all that have gone to Mars. Few of them, to my knowledge, have been interested in the life forms there. The expense of freight in space is much too high for Terran zoos to transport Martian life forms, particularly alive, considering the cost of duplicating in the spacecraft the living conditions necessary to—" "All right," I snapped. "Just a minute." I picked up the visor phone and dialed rapidly. In seconds, Jerry Mason's friendly pan lit up the screen. "Listen, Jerry," I said. "Have you ever heard of a Martian Zloor?" His eyebrows went up. "Sure. What? Are they particularly fast?" "No, of course not, but—" "Are they dangerous?" He grinned, but he was still puzzled. "I'd say they were about the least dangerous animal I ever heard of, but nup. Just one more question, Jerry. I'm in a hurry. Do you think I could catch one?" "I can't think of anything you could catch easier." He started to give one of his short bursts of laughter. "But—" "Thanks, Jerry," I told him. "See you later." I snapped off the set and turned back to Wesley Marks. "All right. Answer just one question, and I'll take up that bet of yours. What's secret about this?" "If I tell you, you'll take on the job." "The job and the 1,000-credit bet," I grated. "Very well. It is suspected that the Zloor is an alien life form." I stared at him. "Are you around the corner?" I demanded. "Of course it's an alien life form. Didn't you just say it's a Martian animal?" But some authorities think it is alien to this solar system. At least they suspect so. That's why the government wants a specimen to dissect and thoroughly investigate. They haven't the facilities on Mars, of course, so it will be necessary to bring one back here." I still stared at him. "Alien to the solar system? Your roof must be leaking. How would it get here?" A sudden suspicion hit me. "You mean it's intelligent? I thought there wasn't any intelligent life forms on Mars." He shook his head. "It's a stupid, herbivorous animal." He shot a glance down at his watch. "The shuttle for the space station leaves in 3 hours. Can you make it?" I glared at him. "You give me plenty of time, don't you? I'll make it all right. But first I want this bet down in writing." "Of course," he said smoothly. I had to hustle plenty. The Zloor wasn't any bigger than a rabbit, and I knew that life forms on Mars were in general small, so I took nothing larger than my little carbine-sized .22 Hornet, another gun that Wesley Marks probably would have sneered at, but which I wouldn't have traded for all the automatics you could shake a stick at. I didn't take much else. No clothes except the shorts I wore when I climbed into the shuttle rocket for the space station. When Mark said freight rates in space were high, he wasn't just whistling terror forever. I could buy clothes and any other equipment I needed a good deal cheaper on Mars than the cost of transporting them there would come to. For one thing, when anybody left the colony planet to come back to Terra, they invariably left behind everything in the way of clothing and personal equipment. For another, a certain amount of these things were being manufactured on Mars from native raw materials in an attempt to escape the murderous space rates. After the 4G's acceleration had cut off, and we were in free fall, I took the opportunity to read the contract I'd hurriedly signed with Wesley Marks. On thorough reading, the contract didn't seem too bad. All my expenses to and from Mars were paid by Marks. I also got 5 credits a month in the way of salary. No fortune, but average pay for a Terran worker. If I caught a Zloor and brought it back alive, I got 500 credit bonus. If I brought 2 back alive, a 700 credit bonus. If I brought a dead one back, I got a 300 bonus. Wesley Marks didn't seem to be interested in getting more than 1 dead one, since there wasn't any provision for a larger number. He'd given me to understand that this job was for the government, but from the way the contract read, I was working for the Marks Enterprises. That irritated me for a minute or so, but I finally shrugged it off. He probably had a government contract to secure one of the things. I still couldn't figure out what his angle was, but I knew there must be one. Too much money was involved to make this a routine assignment such as I usually work on for the zoos. Evidently, Marks ran some sort of an expediting outfit which took on off-trail contracts. At this point, I might do a little in the way of describing my trip to the space station which circles Terra and is used as a takeoff point to Luna and the planets. I might go on and tell of my journey from there to the space station in orbit about Mars, and then, further still, of my shuttling down to Fort Mars and my first impressions of landing there, of the 1/6 gravity, the thin air, the plastic dome which covers the whole little city. But the trouble is that 100 people a lot quicker with a dictotyper than I am have already done the job. I'll just leave that part of it and take up with my first contact with my fellow Terrans on Mars. One of the old gags is to the effect that when Greek meets Greek, they start a restaurant. Okay, maybe, but I do know this, that when man in general starts up a new colony, one of the first buildings he puts up is a bar. At any rate, as soon as I was settled at the Builtless Hotel, the name, of course, is a gag, but the place lived up to it, I made my way to Sam's. Now, there's something that invariably happens to people who get around. It's happened to you, if you're one of us. Maybe you're walking through the Congo Game Preserve, figuring there isn't another man, white or otherwise, within 100 kilometers. Suddenly you run into another party, and somebody yells, "Hello, Nap! What in Kurt are you doing here?" The last time you saw him was in San Francisco. Or maybe you're doing some solitary drinking in some obscure bar in Guatemala. The guy next to you looks over and says, "Say, aren't you Snap Prescott, the brother of—" And of course, you are. Well, that was it. I hadn't any more got up to the bar and told Sam, "Let me have some of this Martian woji I've been hearing so much about," when I heard somebody yelp, "It's Nap! I'll be a grinning Macron if it isn't Nap!" I turned around, and there was Mike Holliday, as big as life and twice as drunk. He waddled his bulk over to me. Mike always waddles when he's soused, from the table where he'd been sitting. "By the holy jumping Vodo," he crowed, "I'll bet my left arm you came to get a Zloor." I'd been grinning and holding out my hand to clasp his, but that stiffened me. He saw it and began to laugh uproariously. "Another joiner of the club," he yelped. "Come on over and meet your fellow members. You got one of them Wesley contracts too?" That did it. I went over and met the boys. Mike Holliday wasn't the only acquaintance of mine in Fort Mars. In fact, it was like a convention of the outstanding professional hunters of Earth. They all shouted their greetings, some of them laughing so hard tears rolled down their cheeks. Evidently, they got a big kick every time a newcomer was added to their ranks. I shook hands with some, but most were too hilarious to go through the ceremony. Blackie Conover yelled, "I'll bet anybody 2-1 he brought a 22 Hornet to shoot himself as Zloor. 2-1. "Do we look like suckers?" Mike yelled back at him. I sank into a chair and took it for a while. "I can wait," I growled at them. "Sooner or later somebody'll get around to telling me what goes on." "He can wait," he says. Doughbelly fairly yelped in delight. "Brother, he ain't just a whistling terror forever. He can wait. Bring on the Woji. Start the initiation." I woke up in the morning in Mike Holliday's apartment. I groaned and told myself that I was sworn off of Woji for all time. I didn't know then that Terracide liquor sold for 10 credits a bottle. Mike was grinning down at me. "You'll get used to Woji," he said. "I should live so long," I moaned. Then I sat up suddenly in the bed. "You guys wouldn't tell me anything last night," I said. He was still grinning. "That's part of the initiation to the Zloor Club. What do you want to know, Nap?" I swung my feet over the side of the bed and came to a sitting position. I groaned and shook my head in an attempt to clear it. "What are half the professional hunters I know doing on Mars?" He spun a chair around so that the back faced me and straddled it, his arms resting on the top rung. "Same thing you are, Nap, being suckers for that Macron Wesley Marks." I started to say something there, but he interrupted me with a wave of a hand. "This is what it boils down to. Marks has a contract with some branch of the government to bring back one or more Zloors, and don't ask me why he doesn't go out and catch one himself. He's tried." "He has, eh?" "Yes, he has. Had a whole crew up here. What makes it nice for him is that he's on a cost-plus basis. If he never succeeds, it'll still be money in his pocket. If he does, he gets a whopping big bonus. Every time he sends another man up here to take a crack at getting a Zloor, he makes money. No doubt the way he told you the story, you'd think you were the only one trying." I snorted. He told me I'd been picked because I was the smallest pro hunter in the game. Mike Holliday grinned. "He picked me because I was so big. I could stand the rigours of life of Mars," he said. "Well, if it's a racket, why doesn't everybody go home on the next ship?" "Probably for the same reason you won't. That sharper made me so sore I bet him 500 credits I could catch a Zloor." "I bet him 1,000, I groaned. Mike whistled. "Where'd you ever get 1,000 credits, Nap?" "I broke into my piggy bank," I growled. "It's every cent I had in the world." "Well, we're all in the same boat. He made bets with all the boys. If we go back, we lose. As long as we stay here, we make 5 credits a month, plus expenses. And, besides, all of us are just conceited enough to think we can figure out eventually how to get one of the things home." "Now you're getting to the point," I told him. "What's so hard about catching a Zloor?" He began to grin again. "Nothing," he said, "and that's all I'll tell you now. Go out and find the gruesome details yourself." I went over to the wash basin and filled the bowl and dipped my head into the water. I didn't say anything else to him until I'd dried myself and climbed into my clothes. "All right," I said then. "Where do I go to see about getting equipment and men for an expedition to the Zloor country?" He laughed. "All you need in the way of equipment is your feet. That is, besides a plastic oxygen mask when you leave the dome." He pointed out the window. "Just head for the nearest rocky area. There's lots of it. You won't have any trouble finding a Zloor. In fact, they're numerous. No natural enemies." I scowled at him. "What keeps them down, then?" "Insufficient forage, I guess. You'll see." I picked up my .22 Hornet rifle and started for the door. "No time like the present, too?" I began to say. Mike was still grinning in the irritating manner he'd been displaying ever since the night before. "You won't need that gun," he told me. I'll just take it along anyway, I snapped. After leaving the dome through one of the airlocks, I headed out into the surface of Mars, weighted down with my leaded boots, standard equipment for cutting down some of the effect of the 1/6 gravity of the planet. Over to the westward, possibly 3 miles away, seemed to be a barren, rocky area. I knew that Mike Holliday wouldn't have deliberately lied to me. That was where Zloors were to be found. I made my way in that direction. "About the size of a rabbit," I muttered, "and half the hunters on Earth can't bring one back." I made the rocky area and found myself a suitable prominence from which to look around. In less than 15 minutes I'd spotted one of the things. They were about the size of a rabbit all right, and what was more, they looked considerably like one of the Earth-type rodents. Long ears, nub of a tail. I watched it for some time through the small glass I'd borrowed from Mike. It was evidently eating the bark, and possibly the wood as well, of a stunted, rugged-looking Martian tree which seemed to be growing out of almost solid rock. The boys had said that there were a lot of Zloors around, so I didn't have to worry about conversion. I took up the rifle, aimed carefully through the scope, and squeezed the trigger. I was interested, eventually, in getting a live Zloor, but it wouldn't hurt to have a closer look at one of the things to help me in planning my campaign. The gun snapped, and I could see the tiny bullet spank into the little animal's side. I'd got him. But something didn't look right. I took up the telescope again and peered through it. The Zloor was still eating. That stopped me. I could have sworn that I'd hit it right amidships. I aimed even more carefully this time for its head and squeezed gently. That shot too hit dead center. But the Zloor didn't bother to stop its feeding. I sat there a long time staring at it. Finally I snorted inwardly. Obviously this was what had been stopping the others. This animal has some very effective natural body armor. Well, there is more than one way of skinning a Zloor, as well as a cat. I picked up the rifle and headed down toward the tree and the animal that was devouring it, figuring to get as close as possible with the idea of getting a really good look at the bulletproof beastie. I wished now that I'd brought my .257 Roberts instead of the .22 Hornet. At first, I was careful in my approach, slipping from cover to cover, but as I got closer, it became evident that the Zloor wasn't particularly timid, and that as far as it was concerned, I could come as near as I wanted. I stood off about 5 feet and watched it for a long time. Once it looked up and over at me, but then went back to the tree, in which it was making a respectable hole. I tried once again with the rifle, aiming carefully right behind its ear. The gun snapped, and the bullet thudded, but the Zloor ignored it. "Holy Wodo!" I snorted. "He's really bulletproof." In fact, he was more than just bulletproof. The shock of the impact of the high-powered .22 hadn't even bothered him. It wasn't just a matter of the bullet's inability to penetrate the hide. Well, I told myself, let's see just how close I can come before it runs off. I walked up to him cautiously. He didn't move. In my surprise, I even prodded him gently with my shoe. He still didn't move. He looked up at me again, his eyes a wistful yellowish colour, then went back to his meal. I shook my head, wondering if I was still suffering from the effects of the Woji binge, or what. This was just too easy. Maybe it was a sick one or something. I reached down and grasped it by the ears and started to pick it up. Have you ever tried to pick up something and found out it either weighed considerably more or was fastened to the floor? That's what happened to me. With Martian gravity what it is, I figured I'd have a weight of possibly 1 earth-pound of lift. Instead, I nearly broke my back, and the Zloor still didn't budge. I put more pressure to bear, all my strength, and the Zloor complacently went on eating. Hands on hips, I stood above the rabbit-like animal and stared at it. Finally I muttered, more than one way to bring home a Zloor, and taking my gun by the barrel, I swung it viciously down at the gentle-looking little animal, feeling like a heel as I did it. I might have saved my feelings, because 2 seconds later I was gazing wide-eyed at the shattered stock of my rifle, and the Zloor was still eating away at the tree. I tried just one more experiment before I called it a day. I put the rifle barrel under him and tried to pry him off the ground. The Zloor still ignored me, but the steel barrel bent under the pressure. The animal hadn't budged. Without knocking, I walked back into Mike Holliday's room. He was lying stretched out on the bed, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He didn't need to look at me. He said, "Nap, you are now a full-fledged member of the Zloor Club." "What does one of those things weigh?" I snapped. "Hey, redhead," he grunted, "don't take it out on me. I didn't invent them. Far as I know, nobody's ever weighed one, but it's been estimated that they go about 5 tons here on Mars, 6 times that on Earth." "That's insane." "Sure is. That's why the government wants one so badly. Just isn't natural for such an animal to develop in the solar system. Or anywhere else." He got up on one elbow and grinned over at me. "The theory is that it's a life form from some planet belonging to a white dwarf star. Some time ago, a guy named Adams at the Mount Wilson Observatory, back on Earth, estimated that the density of some of the white dwarfs was 2,000 times greater than platinum. I'm not much up on it myself." I scowled down at him. "How'd it get here?" He was serious now. "That's the reason the government wants one so badly, Nap. They want to get it to their laboratories and find out everything they can. There's only seems to be one possibility, though." "What's that?" "If it is alien to the solar system and from a white dwarf's planet, it might have been brought here deliberately and left as a guinea pig." I began to say something there, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Possibly an exploring spaceship from the alien planet was looking for colony sites. When it got to our solar system, it left some of these animals with the idea of coming back in a few thousand years or so to see if the Zloors were able to adapt themselves to the conditions existing here." I ran my tongue over suddenly dry lips. "You mean that if the Zloors can live in our solar system, then these more intelligent aliens would figure they could use our sun system for a colonizing project?" He nodded. "Holy Wodo," I said. "No wonder they want some specimens to work on back on Earth." He relaxed again. "Well, at the rate we're going, it'll be a long time before Earth laboratories ever have the opportunity to mess around with our pal the Zloor." I got a chair and sat down facing him and said seriously, "Mike, brief me on what you and the other fellows have tried." "You don't have to ask. That goes with membership in the club," he grinned. "Among other things, we've tried building a steel box around one of them with the idea of putting wheels on it later." "That sounds good." "Uh-huh. The trouble was that when the Zloor felt like moving, he walked right through the side of the steel box, like you or I'd walk through a wall of tissue paper." "How about poisoning one?" I rapped. "You could get a dead one back a lot easier then." "They don't poison," he said. "And from what we can figure, they're practically immortal. We have never found a dead one." "What do you mean they don't poison?" "Just that, Nap. That animal can eat anything organic and thrive on it. Evidently, no poison that nature has ever produced affects it. At least, none of us have been able to dream one up." "How about narcotics? Something to dope it?" He shook his head. "To begin with, some of these Martian plants produce narcotic effects that make the products of our poppy look like food for babes, but the Zloor takes them in its stride. It's really got a cast-iron stomach. We've never been able to locate anything it won't eat and enjoy eating." I didn't say anything for a long time. Then, A bazooka rifle would kill one. Sure, he said, and splatter it all around the scenery at the same time. The laboratories need a good specimen. There was another long silence. Finally I said, Why in the name of Wodo won't they sink into the ground if they weigh as much as all that? They would, only they make a point of walking on rock. That must be one of the things that limits their spreading even more widely. They have to be able to forage on ground that supports very little vegetation. You could lift one with a derrick, he said. This is the 5th time I've been through this. Every guy that Wesley Marks send up here ask the same questions. Sure, you could lift it with a derrick if the derrick was big enough. Do you have any idea of what it costs to bring a derrick of that size to Mars? And that's not the only thing either. These laws are gentle as lambs, but they hate to be confined against their will. That derrick have to have some awfully strong equipment to keep the Zloor from breaking loose and ambling off. There's other angles there too. Suppose your derrick did lift him into the shuttle. When you got the shuttle up to the space station, how do you move the Zloor from the shuttle to the station, and then from the station to the rocket for Terra? He got up from the bed and went over to a little table to return with a bottle and a couple of glasses. He poured 2 drinks and handed me one. Here, he said, you look like you could use a quick one. Have a hair of a dog that's going to bite Kurt out of you before you ever leave Mars. I grated. I could stand the rest of it, but what burns me up is that Macron Wesley Marks. Here he is getting rich on the project. Besides what he makes from the government, he's bet every one of us so much that we'll all be out our life savings when we go back. Brother Knapp, you have said it, Mike Holliday said feelingly. He tilted the glass to his lips and drank deeply. I was right behind him. It was more than 2 years later when I walked into the office of Wesley Marks. I noted with pleasure that he still looked as aristocratic as ever. Ah, he said, Mr. Napoleon Prescott. As I recall, the last time we met you objected to my calling your namesake a bust. Don't tell me that we have an additional bust in. I loved it. I loved every word of it, and he must have seen that I did. What are you grinning about? He barked. It was the first time I had seen his poise disturbed. Frankie, I told him, is at the spaceport right now. Johnny will be down on the next shuttle. As you can imagine, the shuttle was pretty well strained to capacity to bring even one at a time. It was no trouble in space, of course, since they were weightless in free fall, but entering the gravitational... He put his hands on the top of the desk and half came to his feet. His eyes were wide. Who are Frankie and Johnny? I feigned surprise. Frankie and Johnny are sweethearts, a couple of Zloors, in this case. Remember? You sent me for them. I thought a male and a female would be best. He slumped back in his chair. You aren't lying? I didn't say anything. How did you do it? With peach pits, I said. Peach pits? Peach pits. Peach pits. They're like apricot pits too, and sometimes prune seeds. What in the world are you talking about, Prescott? Have you lost your mind? I opened the humidor on his desk, took out a cigar, smelled it, bit off the end, lit it, and took a deep puff before answering him. I settled down into a comfortable chair and pointed the lighted end of the cigar in his direction. Between one or the other of us, we had tried everything. Everything. I realized finally that it would have to be an entirely different approach. I took another satisfying drag on the cigar, then went on. I tried lettuce, cabbage, corn, string beans, everything in fact that the hydroponic tanks on Mars could supply in the way of Earth-type food. None of it worked. What in hell are you talking about? Marks blurted. I ignored him. Finally it came to me. Lettuce and the other vegetables I offered would be too light for them. I tried walnut hulls, and then peach pits, and that worked like a charm. "You must be insane." "You don't seem to understand, Marks," I told him. "There was no other way of getting a Zloor on board an earthbound rocket, so I made pets of a couple of them. They love pits. Regular delicacy from them," I added reflectively. "You'd be surprised how well trained I've got Frankie and Johnny. I'd hate to give them up." I tapped the ash of the cigar off on his heavy carpet and said, "However, business is business. Let's see, by our contract, you owe me 5 credits for each month I've been gone, plus a 700 credit bonus for bringing back 2 live Zloors, and then there's that 1,000 credit wager we made." He snapped on his inter-office communicator and growled instructions to his secretary to find whether or not I had brought back 2 live Zloors in the Mars rocket. We sat there silently while she checked. I puffed on the cigar with appreciation and dropped the ashes, pointedly, on the floor. He was irritated, but wouldn't give me the satisfaction of complaining. I knew I was being childish, but I loved it. The inter-office communicator buzzed, and he listened to his secretary's report, then reached down into his desk for a checkbook. He said while he was writing it, "I'm sure you'll be pleased to know, Prescott, that in spite of this sum I'm giving you, I'll still make a considerable profit on this deal." I took the check and examined it carefully. I told him, "but I wouldn't be very surprised if a good deal of that profit is going to be melting away." "Eh? What do you mean?" he snapped. I told him, "The other boys up on Mars are still well equipped with peach pits. They're all making pets too. The next few rockets from Mars are going to be loaded with Zloors, Wesley, old man. You're going to have a flock of bets to pay off. And besides that, I'm wondering if the government is going to want that many Zloors. As I understand it, 2 is all they're contracted for with you. Of course, you'll have to pay the boys for them." He didn't say anything as I left, fanning the check to dry it, but he looked as though he'd met his Waterloo. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. This is what the future looked like many, many years ago.